Rafi here from the Endgame Investor. You can find me on Seeking Alpha under the pen name Officer Lib. If you haven't tried a 2-week free trial of the Endgame Investor yet, please click in the description below and you can go to my magic internet portal where you will find the landing page. I wanted to share a message about the holiday of Rosh HaShana that is starting tonight. There's a common misconception among most people, even among Jews, that this is the Jewish New Year. That's partly true, but not entirely. The Jewish New Year is actually on Passover, because that is when the Jews were taken out of Egypt. And when we were taken out of Egypt, it was interesting that we had to do one act of defiance before we could leave, which was taking the Egyptian god of sheep and slaughtering it in front of everybody and smearing its blood on our doorposts so that they knew what we did. It was one single act of defiance that was made and done when the Egyptians were at their absolute weakest. But without that single act of defiance, there would have been no freedom. There would have been no point in going into the desert and following God into the desert and then going to the promised land. It would have been pointless, because if you cannot act on defiance of your masters, then you have no freedom. Even if somebody else frees you, you still have that slave mentality. And even with that act of defiance, the entire story of the Torah, of the Pentateuch, of the 5 books of Moses, is how the Jews were freed, but refused to act like free people and kept returning to a slave mentality. And God and Moses trying to bash that out of our heads by punishment after punishment after punishment for refusing to be free. Eventually, enough of the Jews became free to enter the land, but it was a grueling process that took many years and many, many failures that kept happening over and over and over again. In any case, Rosh HaShana has nothing to do with that. Rosh HaShana has to do with the world, not necessarily the Jewish people. The world was created before the Jewish people were created. And the birthday of the world is a different birthday than the birthday of the Jewish people. So Rosh HaShana is really the Jewish celebration of the New Year for the entire world. It's not the Jewish New Year. It's the New Year for the entire world, celebrated and marked by Jews. So why would that be? Why can't we just have the Jewish New Year and that's it? Because the Jews are supposed to be representatives for the world to God. Most of the time, we're doing a really, really bad job. And I would say that we're doing a pretty bad job right now, too. But there are many Jews that are on the right side of this, that know what they're doing, and they're sanctifying the name of God in front of the world and standing up for what is right. And there are many others that are on the other side of this, the side that we don't want to mention. So as the world enters a new year, it's going to be a pretty scary year, because this year, I believe, is the year of the debt reset. And as much as central bankers and money printers and social engineers want to think that they have control of the situation, I can guarantee you that they do not one bit. And their plans will not work. Their plans of a reset to totalitarian control of the entire world are not going to work. So you don't have to worry about central bank digital currencies taking over every single transaction, all privacy of our lives, because we do have one weapon that they cannot overcome, and that is to destroy fiat currencies. The hyperinflation, according to Austrian economist Murray Rothbard, who also was a Jew who was on the right side of this issue, he held that hyperinflation was the last line of defense of the people against a tyrannical government. Because once a government currency hyperinflates, they lose control of the entire system. And once they lose control of the entire system, their power, the illusion of their power, is gone. That is what is going to happen when dollars, which is the reserve currency of the planet, can no longer be exchanged for any amount of gold. And that, I believe, is going to happen this coming year, 5782, which starts tomorrow. I want to share with you guys 2 articles that happen to both be from CNBC that really show how our economic overlords see us and how they bifurcate economics from morality, and why seeing economics as a bunch of statistics instead of a study, a hands-off study of human interaction and human action, is a fundamentally immoral way of looking at the entire system. Here's the first article from CNBC. Inflation could repeat the 1960s when the Fed lost control, Niall Ferguson says. Key points. The Federal Reserve and many economists maintain that the recent spike in inflation will be transitory, but Ferguson called this into question. Data releases on U.S. home prices and consumer inflation expectations may have added to the Fed's concerns. Article begins. Inflation, by which he means rising prices. Inflation really, of course, is the inflation of the money substitute supply over the existing money supply, which is gold. Inflation could be repeating the trajectory of the late 1960s, which laid the foundation for sustained high prices the following decade, according to economic historian Niall Ferguson. Ferguson told CNBC on Friday that policymakers are facing a new challenge in the form of rising inflation as a result of responding to the COVID-19 pandemic in a fashion similar to their response to the Great Recession of 2008. Similar, but much more crazy. Both responses were the massive inflation of the money supply. This time is about 10 times greater. Here's the quote that I wanted to dissect. Quote, what is interesting about disasters is that one can lead to another. How interesting. Yes, Niall Ferguson. Very interesting. You can go from a public health disaster to a fiscal, monetary, and potentially inflationary disaster, Ferguson said at the Ambrosetti Forum in Italy. Now here is the line. It is not such a big disaster. It doesn't kill people. But an inflation liftoff would be a problem. Not such a big disaster. A hyperinflationary spiral would not be such a big disaster because it doesn't kill people. Ask the destitute people in every hyperinflationary country, in every hyperinflationary society and economy that's ever existed, if it's killed people. Of course it's killed people. It does more than that. It drives everybody crazy. It drives morality off the charts. It drives people to become immoral. It drives people to care nothing about their fellow man because they're trying to survive. When their lives, their livelihoods, their businesses, their families have been ripped apart by financial ruin. And he says this is not a big disaster. There's such a disconnect here, a moral disconnect between people who view economics as a bunch of statistics of people and those who stand up for moral ethics. Ask the people in Zimbabwe in 2008 if the hyperinflation there wasn't a disaster. Ask the people in Hungary in 1945 if their hyperinflation wasn't a disaster. Ask the people in Yugoslavia in 1992 if their hyperinflation wasn't a disaster and people were killed. Ask the people in 1923 Weimar if their hyperinflation wasn't a complete disaster, which eventually led to the rise of Hitler. They're all pure disasters, moral, ethical, and human disasters. Here's the other article that I wanted to share. And this has to do with Rosh HaShana. Stagflation is the greatest threat to Europe's recovery, warns ex-Italian Prime Minister Monti. Key points. Monti said the huge mass of accommodative monetary policy by central banks and fiscal stimulus from governments may well fire more inflation, by which he means more consumer price gains. At the same time, Monti said there were a number of constraints on the flexibility of production to increase. Yeah, like certain policies, certain health policies that the world has been taking, forbidding people from living their lives. That kind of hurts production a little bit, yes. Former Italian Prime Minister Mario Monti told CNBC Saturday that he believes the greatest threat to Europe's economic recovery from the coronavirus pandemic is stagflation. Monti, now the president of Italy's Bocconi University, said the huge mass of accommodative monetary policy, by which he means inflation of the money supply, by central banks and fiscal stimulus from governments implemented to support economies amid the coronavirus pandemic may well fire more inflation. May well. Yes, indeed, it is. At the same time, Monti said there were a number of constraints on the flexibility of production to increase, like green passports and lockdowns and quarantines and making it impossible to live and do work. Indeed, yes, certain constraints. Here's the thing. I've been noticing that mainstream financial media is becoming a little bit more liberal in their use of the word stagflation and inflation and 1970s. But you know what brought us out of the stagflation of the 1970s? Nothing but the tightest monetary policy that the United States and the world ever saw. Putting the world into a tight monetary policy at this point would collapse the entire economy faster than anything that we've ever seen. So if we are indeed approaching a 1970s stagflation, there will be no way out of it this time. There is no way that central banks can tighten monetary policy to the levels of the late 1970s in order to bring back confidence in the monetary medium this time. There is no chance of that at all. So if these mainstream economists who have very little understanding of morality, if they are right in worrying about stagflation and inflationary disasters, what they don't understand is that there is no way to escape it this time. But I don't want to leave the year of 5781, the message that a hyperinflation is indeed a disaster. Because according to Murray Rothbard, Austrian economist, who happens also to be a Jew, hyperinflation is not so much a disaster as the last line of defense against tyranny from governments. Because what enables governments to pursue these policies of discrimination and green passports and all the other stuff that they're doing, shutting down human society, shutting down human creativity, and destroying families? What enables them to do all this? They need to fund it. They need to pay people to enforce this stuff, to feed them, to give them money that can still buy stuff. They do that through inflation of the money supply. Once hyperinflation of consumer prices hits, then no amount of further inflation of the money supply does anything, and they lose their grip on power. That, I believe, is what is going to happen in 5782, this coming new year. Because this, as I said in a previous video, is a sabbatical year. It is a Shemitah year. In Shemitah, every 7 years on the Jewish calendar, there is a debt reset, a small debt reset. And every 7 sabbatical years, there's a bigger debt reset. We are in the 7th sabbatical year since the sabbatical year of 1973, which permanently took the dollar off of the gold standard. It started in 1971. It was completed in 1973 with a final attempt to put the dollar back on gold at $42.22, which failed. From then on, the end of Bretton Woods became permanent, and the dollar became an unbacked currency. The only reason that it can still function as a currency is that it can still be exchanged for some amount of gold right now, about $1,830 per ounce. But this year, I believe, and no, I don't know for sure, I'm not a prophet, but I do believe that this year will be the final year of this monetary system. And remember what I said at the beginning of this video, that Rosh HaShana is not really the Jewish New Year. It is the Jewish celebration of the New Year of the world. And Shemitah years, sabbatical years, start on Rosh HaShana, which means these debt resets, according to the Jewish law system, are really debt resets for the world, as this is the New Year for the world, celebrated by Jews and not the Jewish New Year. So yes, I think this year is going to be a sabbatical, a Shemitah year of a debt reset for the entire world. Am I 100% positive? No. But I do know enough about both Jewish history and world history and math and logic to assume that things could line up this year in a way which will see the end of the fiat monetary system based on the dollar and the dawn of a completely new era that none of us have any idea what it's going to bring. But it's got to be better than this. This will be the debt reset to end all debt resets as we know them. And the world will fight back against tyranny by rejecting government currencies and going back to free market money. So no, you don't have to worry about central bank digital currencies and their loss of privacy that they will entail, because this year the world is going to fight back against tyranny by destroying the monetary media of governments all over the world, by attacking the value of the US dollar. And then, yes, there will be a massive debt reset, and all owners of government bonds all over the world will most likely lose everything. And the real capital of the world will be in the hands of those who control the actual money supply, from which government monetary media still draw their value. The only reason that government money substitutes can buy anything on the market today is because they can still be exchanged for some amount of real money, whether silver or gold. But this coming year, 5782, I believe will be the year when that ends. And all of the edicts that governments have placed up against us will crumble into nothing. Rosh HaShana is about acknowledging the kingship of God over the world, and not the central plans of man, which always fail in the end, and they will fail spectacularly this time as well. And this time it will be across the entire world. It's going to be intense. Parts of it are going to be scary, but it will also lead to the biggest eruption of liberty and freedom throughout the entire planet. And we are going to have to build from the bottom up what has been destroyed since 1971. This is Rafi from the Endgame Investor. Please sign up for a 2-week free trial to see what I write for my subscribers to protect them in the endgame that is surely coming. And have a great year for the entire world. Shana Tova.